On this aerial view, we can see at the bottom the village of Shepherdswell, to the north Palmerston, and to the west Woolwich Green. Long Lane today runs from this point near Woolwich, and then in the southwesterly direction, first as a byway, and then as a tarmac road to the top of Golgotha, just here. Long Lane, though, appears to be part of a much longer and more important route than it appears today. This ancient trackway most likely carried people from Canterbury to St Margaret's Bay, and is probably older than the Roman road, today the A2, that runs alongside it in parts. If we are to apply the lessons we've learned from other chalk downs, it is highly likely that the trackway predates the Romans. Although settlements were often found below the ridgeway of the North Downs, it was easier to travel on the dry and well-draining chalk ridges. The main reason it survived in use for so long was probably the deep water and safe anchorage that was offered by the Goodwin Sands opposite St Margaret's Bay. The bay was still being used as a place to board a ship in the 18th century, and even today, ships and ferries waiting for entry to the harbour of Dover will often anchor just off the St Margaret's Bay, Goodwin Sands protection offered to them. This map is the 1769 Andrews, Drury and Herbert map of Kent. Here's Dover, and if we zoom in here to St Margaret's, we can see a bay with a sea gate and some jetties. It is thought this was finally washed away by 1800. Cecil Knox writes that the area suffered from a serious erosion period between 1769 and 1906, and it is thought up to 300 feet could have been lost. What the rate of erosion was before that date we do not know, but 1800 years earlier St Margaret's Bay must have been a very useful harbour. This harbour was formed by the submersion of the valley which we see descending from the lighthouse. As it nears the shore it becomes steeper and narrower, being flanked by considerable cliffs where it enters the sea. It seems then probable that in Roman times the harbour was narrow and enclosed by cliffs. On August 26th, 55 BC, Caesar, waiting for his transports to come up, anchored, according to Rice Holmes, off the South Foreland, and writes, "The formation of the ground," Caesar tells us, "was peculiar, the sea being so closely walled in by narrowing cliffs that it was possible to throw a missile from the ground above onto the shore. This seems to be entirely in keeping with the suggested harbour." We know of its written existence as early as the year 990 AD, when Archbishop of Canterbury, Sigeric, made the pilgrimage to Rome following the Via Francigena to receive his pallium from Pope Benedict IV. Let us take a quick look at Sigeric, as it is because of his writings we see pilgrims today walking the route through East Kent as part of the Via Francigena pilgrimage. Sigeric played an important role in early English history. He was educated at Glastonbury Abbey, where he took holy orders, then was elected abbot of St Augustine's in about 975, and consecrated by Archbishop Dunstan as Bishop of Ramsbury in 985. He was then transferred to the See of Canterbury in 990. It was Sigeric who advised King Ethelred II, or Unready, to pay a tribute to the invading Danish king Sven Forkbeard in 991. Ethelred presented Svein with £10,000 of silver, in response to which Svein temporarily ceased his destructive advance into England, though he later returned for further tribute. Sven's ever-increasing demands in the following years resulted in a debilitating tax later known as the Danegeld, payable by the inhabitants of Ethelred's territories. In fact, he didn't stay away very long, because in 994 Sigeric himself paid tribute again to the Danes to protect Canterbury Cathedral from being burned to the ground. This sculpture is of Sigeric astride his mount on pilgrimage and can be found at Glastonbury. Let us return to Canterbury and the start of this ancient trackway. The route today starts at the Church of St Martin of Tours, the oldest church in England. As we follow the track, we will come across several ancient sites. At Patricksbourne, the Pilgrim's Way, also known as the North Downs Way, veers to the south and follows along the side of the old Roman road. However, if we stick to the ridge proper, the path remains straight on, and this is probably the likely original old track to St Margaret's. Both these paths run parallel with each other until meeting again at Womanswold. Before then, we go past what would have been a highly visible Iron Age settlement at Bridge, and a couple of known round barrows, one in front of Highland Court and the other opposite Kingston. Nothing remains of these barrows other than their ghostly circles made on aerial photos. From here, the route takes us on to Womanswold and then into Long Lane. As we go onto the byway, we are approaching what is known to locals as 3 Barrow Down, but is also called Rubery Butts. Here, at this point, the track brushes the edge of these 3 intact series of barrows, which are a scheduled monument. They are exceptionally rare in this part of the country, as Kent has been extensively farmed for the best part of 2,000 years, and in the last 300 of those, numerous barrows have been ploughed through and are no longer visible to us. A few hundred years ago, the views surrounding the barrows would have been treeless, and they would have been visible at the crest of the hill and stood out for all to see. The Shepherdswell and Coleridge History Society, with the help of local parish councils, are currently in the process of restoring and saving these magnificent parts of our heritage. Following the track, we soon become a road, and this takes us over the railway line and towards Long Lane Farm. Long Lane Farm is a Grade 2 listed building, and Historic England record it as being built in the 17th century or earlier. Its listing describes it as being built of painted brick and rendered with plain tiled roof. It has a 3-bay lobby entry plan, is 2 stories high, with the left 2 bays rendered, the right protected slightly and of brick. It has a hipped roof with stacks to centre right and at end left. There are 3 irregular wooden casements on each floor, with a boarded door to centre right and a blank sunk panel over it. Attached to the right by a short connecting wing is a hipped wing, probably originally a detached granary or outhouse, and there is a cat slide outshot to the rear. From census records, we can tell who was living here at Long Lane Farm. The 1841 census shows us that the occupiers were Joseph Higgins and his 2 sons William and Joseph. The census also shows that he was a farmer and that living on the farm were 5 agricultural labourers, among them a Daisy Nordsted, an April Garlinge, Isaac Coleman, Henry Cork and James Divers. By 1851, we can see that Joseph's son William, along with his new wife Mary, are now running the farm. Joseph Sr. is still living there in Long Lane Farmhouse, along with James Higgins, who is William's brother. The others named on the census are now called servants, and they are Sarah Richards, Thomas Fussell, Stephen Garlinge and William Place. This may be as a result of the farm cottages having been built and occupied by the agricultural workers. Moving on to 1861, and we see that Mary is now a widower and she is running the farm with her brother-in-law James Higgins. Others on the census are again named as servants and are Charlotte Austin, William Patterson and Frederick Cox. Coming to the 1871 census, and the farm has a new family living here. It's James and Henrietta Beer, and they're now working the farm as tenants. Along with them are their children George, Elizabeth, Emily, Edward, Joseph and Mary. Visiting at the time of the census is a Mary Ludgater, a widow, and Arthur Ludgater, who is listed as being 25 years of age and a farmer. Also on the census is John Ashdown, who is recorded as being a servant. The Beer family were not there long, as by 1881 it is George and Mary Miller living there with their children Emily, George, Mary Ann, Henry and 2 other sons. 10 years later, and another family is here at Long Lane Farm. It is Edmund and Charlotte Laker. Edmund is recorded as being a farm bailiff. Their children are Arthur, Emma, Percy, Rosa, Annie and Albert. Also recorded are James Holborn and Arthur Reynolds, both boarding and working as farm servants. Unusually, the 1901 census records the farmhouse as being unoccupied. In the 1911 census, we can see that the farm is now being run by Sarah Golan Masters, and she is helped by her son Hubert. With them are her 2 daughters Daisy Iris and Violet Mary. Also in the 1911 census is Stephen Knight, a farm labourer, who is recorded as sleeping in the barn. The last census or national record is the 1939 register, and that shows the farmhouse is now occupied by Percy and Winnie Stupples, with at least 2 children, Derek and Charles. As we keep travelling along Long Lane, we pass on the right, offset from the road, a farm worker's cottage that was used by the workers of Long Lane Farm. Census records are fairly sparse and only show up accurately in the 1881 census and the 1939 register. In 1881, the cottage is occupied by Peter and Anne Present, who are both recorded as being general labourers with their 2 children, William and Charles. In the 1939 register, it is occupied by Francis Ward, who is aged 76 and recorded as being a military machinist retired from the Royal Engineers. Also living there is Hannah Fidge, aged 74, who is recorded as doing unpaid domestic duties. Returning to the lane, we travel on and arrive at Golgotha. This is a site of importance, as it is the area where the Reverend Brian Fawcett carried out his early excavations in 1772 and 1773. He unearthed a total of 181 graves on the Shepherdswell side of Long Lane and 48 on the Barfriston side of Long Lane. The yellow box marks Fawcett's first excavations in July of 1772, and they cover almost the whole area where numbers 1, 2 and 3 Golgotha now stand. The pink box also marks Fawcett's 1772 excavations, and the purple box his final excavations of this site. The blue circle marks where human bones were found whilst digging the entrance to the Golgotha railway tunnel for the East Kent Light Railway, which runs under Long Lane, which is now referred to on maps as Great Haynes Road. It is thought that the yellow and pink boxes were in fact one large burial site. The parish boundary departs from the road and goes around the crown of the hill, and this is probably the line the ancient track would have taken as it skirted the cemetery. Also at this point, the lane crosses another ancient road that runs from the Roman road at Eastry at an exact angle of 45 degrees from Poison Cross to Shepherdswell. This route looks and feels like another Roman road. Reverend Fawcett uncovered from the Golgotha Cemetery and barrows on Barham Downs numerous ancient artefacts from these graves, including utensils, weapons and some quite exquisite jewellery. When Reverend Fawcett carried out his excavations, he described the site as being a Romano-Briton cemetery. This was because he and others of his time did not consider these finds to be Saxon because of their intricate and beautiful designs. The consensus at the time was that Saxons were just Vikings light, spending their time fighting and conquering, whereas they were in fact also a well-organised farming peoples. Today we know this is probably an Anglo-Saxon cemetery. In Grave 101, a large collection of jewellery were found, including a beautiful fibula subnectans, which is the object at the bottom left of this image. It's made of silver, gilt and filigreed with gold, and set with garnets. Also found was 17 amethysts, 1 large bead, 24 small beads, a small ivory pin, and the blade of a knife. It was likely to have been a woman of considerable wealth, and it certainly did not fit the image of an Anglo-Saxon in Reverend Fawcett's time. Nearly all the items on this plate are from grave number 172. The ones to draw your attention to are the pair in the centre, on which one of them has been engraved into the stone a griffin or lion. These stones are set into solid gold pendants. Shown here is a gold tremesis, a Merovingian struck coin thought to be around 670 AD. It is clearly marked with a cross. As this was worn as a pendant, it is because of the cross, which makes this an early Anglo-Saxon Christian. The early Anglo-Saxons were followers of a pagan religion, which is reflected in their burials from that time, while they later converted to Christianity in the 7th and 8th century, which was again reflected in their burial practices, when cremation ceased to be practiced and inhumation became the sole form of burial, typically being concentrated in Christian cemeteries located adjacent to churches. This in turn begs the question, why were Christians buried here where there is no record or sign of a place of worship on this hill? From Golgotha we pass what is left of Athorn Court Wood, and as we approach Haynes Farm we pass the site of another ancient barrow that has all but disappeared. This one was successfully excavated by Kent archaeologist Keith Parfitt and the Dover Archaeology Group in 1982 and did contain a body. Haynes Farm itself is at least 180 years old, but does not appear to be a listed building. Once again, Looking at census records, we can see who was living here. In 1841, the record shows that John and Anne Tittle are living there with their children James, Emily and Joseph. Also with them is Edward Lassance. They are all agricultural labourers, which would indicate that originally the building was farm labourers' cottages. In 1851, the occupiers are James and Susanna Ovenden, along with their children John, James, Eliza and Annie. Here the adults are listed as farm labourers. It is not clear from the 1861 census which building was Haynes Farm, so we cannot say with any confidence who was living there at the time. In 1871, we find farm servants and a farm labourer living here. The farm servants were William and Mary Mummery and William Pearce, and the farm labourer is James Bartlett, who is here with his wife Eliza. Again, the 1881 census is unclear with building names or places, so we cannot say who was there. In 1891, the occupiers are John and Sarah Fuller, with their children Richard and Catherine. John is recorded as being a farmer. Also with them is a visitor, Anne Martin, and a servant, Isabella Nutley. In 1901, we see yet another family here, and that is Richard and Rosa Hambrook, with their children Eveline, Fanny, Ethel and Catherine. Richard is recorded as being a farm bailiff, and in 1911 we find Richard is remarried to Fanny Louise, and their family has grown. As well as Eveline, Ethel and Catherine, there is now also Albert, Gladys, Walter, Leslie, Ernest and Percy. Richard is still the farm bailiff. The 1939 record shows Richard, now aged 74, and Fanny still living there with their children Leslie, Ernest, Percy, Philip, Stephen, Mabel and Norman. Richard is now the farm manager and his son Leslie the assistant farm manager. All the children living with them are working on the farm. From Haynes Farm we progress through the estate at Watership Park and then along to Little America and then past the ruins of Langdon Abbey. Before we get to the Abbey, the track splits here to go either side of it, and this will lead you either onto Martin or West Langdon. Before the construction of the Abbey, the track may well have gone straight through it. By the time these two roads merge, we find ourselves at the village of St Margaret's at Cliff, and then the route takes us down the valley to the seafront, where there was once a seagate and a harbour. Let us look at one more item. This is a mapped outline of a potential settlement or buildings that lie alongside Long Lane. It can be found here, next to the three barrows that were mentioned earlier. Reverend Brian Fawcett does make comment that just north of these barrows there are a series of ditches and bumps. Today we can only see them from aerial photographs that are taken over the years. Whether these were buildings or settlements or merely enclosures, that is for tomorrow's archaeologists to find out.